When one thinks of a Hall of Fame, often there's a connotation that it's somebody that isn't active in their sport anymore, whether as a player or a coach or a contributor. But for our next inductee, that certainly is not the case. He is in his 50th season as the head coach of the men's cross country and track and field programs. And one could go over all the accomplishments, all the championships, all the stats. But the most significant one would be the hundreds, if not thousands, of student athletes this inductee has positively affected the lives of over the course of those 5 decades. Please welcome Ken OBrien.
Can only go downhill from here. I want to thank all of you in our inner circle of track and cross country runners who turned out tonight for recognition of the successes and enjoyable times that we've had together over the past several years. I choose to term it several years. But who's counting? Years ago, I came to the university like most of you, and I think when we first put this particular school on our radar screen, I lived in eastern Massachusetts, small town of Foxborough. We weren't exactly sure what was here. It was there were no new students programs. You kind of applied because it didn't cost much to go to. You really weren't aware too much about what the school looked like. And right now, as I go to track meets and I officiate and I coach, I'm approached almost weekly by track officials who have been in the service of their skill much longer than I have, and they still think the same thing about the University of Massachusetts. Are you going to go back all the way tonight, Coach? Are you going to stop in Worcester and have the boys be able to stay up in a hotel? We've got a little bit to go with people who are 50 and above, but we certainly, when we look around our audience tonight, we've done a great job with anybody who's had their last years of education at this particular school and have gone out and represented us so well in the world, in the state and in the world around us. I want to thank the servers, the cooks, the waiters, the waitresses. My first job was a waiter at the Foxborough racetrack, which is now the site of Foxborough football Patriots field. 5:30 in the morning, serving breakfast to the jocks who were going to take the horses out for a run. They had to have someone over 21 because the first day I went in to wait on the counter, grizzled old veteran came up and he said, "I have 2 scrambled toast, bacon, and 2 Budweisers, please." 5:30 in the morning. But Foxborough's come a long way, and I think that the people who have been, I would say, gracious enough right now to come and say hello to me for this particular function, that I think they mean a lot to me because we started out together in the sport of athletics, some sports of athletics, and we were lucky enough to play 2 or 3 or 4 sports as you would in a smaller town. The people who came to say hello again to myself and our family who competed for us at the university in the early 60s, I want to thank them for coming back as well. Everybody here in the dais, congratulations on this honor. It's obviously richly deserved, and I think you're as proud a group of people as I know I feel in my heart today, and also for all the people who have given them and myself a tremendous recognition. 2 weeks ago, a gentleman came in from the Atlantic 10 office, and he was commissioned to kind of film and introduce, I guess, maybe the senior coach in the Atlantic 10. It's certainly probably up there. Maybe I'm tied with somebody. He asked me one question. He was nervous about getting started, and he asked me one question, and that question was, how can anybody work in the same place for over 50 years? And I was kind of taken aback. You've all heard tonight a lot of reasons how someone could work in the same place for a lot of years. And I get the hint from some people here that many of them would like to be in that category, at least, if not working here for 50 years, but coming back to visit. It's a tremendous place. It's a place that we all found many times out of our own sheer luck, especially if you were applying in the late 50s and 60s. It didn't have the marketing tools that we have now. It didn't have the reputation that we had now. And we came kind of sight unseen because of its lack of expensive bill that would be handed to your parents, who most likely at that time were working in a state university job, state department job, factory, and maybe not so many of the technology areas that have blessed our parents, your parents, my parents, not so much, but your parents' incomes over the past several years, excuse me. But I told them it was easy. It was real easy to work at this place for over 50 years. Besides the attractions that it presents, all you had to do was take it one day at a time. And that applies a lot in life. It applies a lot in athletics. And it's one of those situations where if you look at it that way, if you learn each day as you go through your one day, it just gets easier and easier and also gets better and better. When I was in high school, I have a couple of great friends from Foxborough High School. I was kind of a non-student, I'd say. I guess I wasn't bad. My grades weren't awful. I sure wasn't excited about that. I was the kind of a guy who came to school every day because he had to be in school if he wanted to go to practice that afternoon. My big motivation was I wanted to be at practice at 2:30. It's funny, I kind of passed all these hurdles and ended up being in the same place. I want to be at practice at 2:30. One time during my senior year, one of my classmates turned to me when the teacher had their back turned to us and said, "We're going to go to college next year." And I said, "I haven't given it any thought. I don't really know. Why would I want to go to college?" And she said, "Well, what do you think you want to do?" And I said, "I hadn't given that any thought either." And she said, "Well, what do you like to do?" And I said, "I like to go to practice at 2:30. And she said, "Well, if you don't go to college, you're not going to go to practice at 2:30 anymore." I said, "I wish I thought of that." So what would I have to do? And she'll say, "Go to the guidance office and get an application." And I walked down, asked for an application, and they gave me one to this great school. I filled it out, sent it up, and basically forgot about it, because that was early in the football season, and I still had to play basketball, baseball, and track. The high school football coach, who was the head coach, was the track coach. The assistant coach coached the baseball team. So they worked out an arrangement that if we didn't have a baseball game that day, I could run track. But if they had a baseball game, I had to play baseball. I never had to practice track. I just had to practice baseball all the time. So I figured I was in pretty good stead. But four sports was absolutely the perfect thing that I needed. I found challenges in every particular venue of the sports, but none greater than trying to do the thing I could do best, which was try to make other people who are on the team either happier, better, more excited, more attentive, somehow to bring a group of young people who liked athletics together and try to become a lot better than we could have been if we had acted alone. So I worked that way for the remainder of the 4 or 5 months, and I eventually found I got an acceptance letter from a coach named William Futtrick, who had the best penmanship of anybody in the world. I was accepted. He had liked me to come out for the team. I was not sure which team I might want to go out for, so I packed my bags. Eventually, at the end of the summer, with that awful job I just told you about, the Foxborough racetrack, worked our way up here, got out of the car. Dad gave me a couple of dollars to put in my wallet so we could buy the 10-cent Cokes that were in the vending machines, and went down to the Curry Hicks Cage building, which obviously is still there. It's a big part of our program right now. Julie and I have our offices in that spot and love every minute of it. And by the way, Trigger, there's still a lot of dings on the rims that you were shooting at. We see them every day when we walk underneath them, but just missed. Walked into the building, Curry Hicks Cage, walked through the lobby, which was the Department of Physical Education preparation building. We were teaching physical education majors, and the School of Education was teaching teachers, and we were teaching teachers in that area. And I had no idea what to do next, and I walked into the lobby. Many of you have probably done that. And a gentleman said from my back left side, who I couldn't see, "I know you, you're Kevin O'Brien." Now, you know I'm not Kevin O'Brien. Other words, that ballot is off, that recognition is off. But look, I looked to him and I saw he had a gray jacket, a UM on his vest, and he had pants on with nice sneakers underneath, and he looked to be a coach to me. And he said, "What team are you going out for?" And at that point, I didn't want to say the wrong team, so I just kept my mouth shut. I played basketball, football, baseball, and track. I figured whichever one it was, I'd be okay. He said, "You want to be on a team?" I said, "Exactly." He said, "Practice is at 2:30. I said, "Oh my God." I was Catholic, but I wasn't really, that Catholic. He said, "Follow me." And he brought me downstairs to a corner, and he introduced me to a man who we all know or knew, named Tommy Bishko. Anybody know Tommy Bishko? Huh? Bud Cobb was his name, Justin Bud Cobb. He almost made it to the dinner tonight, but he has to drive a station wagon up to Maine. He's selling nautical antiques. So Bud said to Tom, "This is Kevin O'Brien." I went, "Oh, God." Give him a new pair of shoes, sweatsuit, and some grays. You guys, anyone here know what grays are? Okay. And a locker. And I had only been on campus for a day and an hour. Stuffed him in the locker. He said, "Practice starts on those cement steps. Be there at 2:30. Oh, boy, I'm in heaven. Come down, put my shoes on, put my grays on, put my sweatsuit on, walked out, and there was 6 or 7 other guys. So we started chatting a little bit. Bud came around in a station wagon, one of those station wagons that has 3 seats that look out to the front and a 2-seater that looks in back. You used to ride those? Cool. We used to ride those all the way to Maine to go to a meet. So we all hop in, and I get in back with a young man named Nick Gutting from Boston Latin High School. I said to Nick, "Where are we going?" He said, "We're going to go out to run a little bit." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "What sport is this?" He said, "Cross country." I said, "What?" "Cross country. Haven't you run it?" "No, what is it?" He said, "Well, you run around the roads and on so I ran track. He said, No, this isn't track. No, nothing near track." I said, "Okay, so I'm locked up in the back of the car. I've got to go." We drive out, anybody in the Western Mass area, Amherst area, we drive out near the road that leads up to the top of Shutesbury Hill. Fortunately, he stopped at the bottom of the hill, and he pointed in the other direction, and he said, "Folks, it's now 3:45. The dining commons closes at 5. If you hustle, you can make it." So we all started running, and the cross-country runners really started running, and Nick, who was a 400-man, really started running, and I jogged as slow as I could because I know that I would never make it back 5 miles or so. Nick was sitting in a rock, clutching his gut about 300 yards down the road, and he and I hitchhiked the ride back to town. Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien didn't raise a dumb guy. So that was the start of my illustrious career here at UMass. And I came back for 50 years to make sure I got it right. We're involved in a sport where there's a lot expected and not a lot of people know about it. Track and field and cross country is one of those sports where it attracts a complete range of athlete that cross spectrums. You have sprinters, hurdlers, jumpers, throwers, distance runners. Throwers, I think you all know. You'll see most of the throwers will compare favorably in size to the NFL football players today, or at least college football players. Similar personalities. Sprinters, not quite the same, a little smaller, very dynamic, and at the same time, they kind of have a rock star personality, very extroverted. Distance runners, pole vaulters, middle distance runners, and hurdlers are kind of in the middle. Pole vaulters are physically okay, but mentally, there's something wrong. They now use fiberglass in the word to think about here is glass. Fiberglass poles, which as they sprint down the runway with the speed of a sprinter, put the bar in the pole vault pole into the back of the box. Aspire to clear a height which is somewhere between 14 and 19 feet above the ground and over a asphalt runway, which is covered with a ½ inch of foam. 18 feet, the bar bends, you're doing a handstand, your head is directly against an asphalt runway, and the coach says, yeah, but it's got a ½ inch of foam. I don't care if it's got a half a foot of foam. No one wants to do that. Distance runners, tall, thin, kind of what you would call intelligent, though they seem to say they're more intelligent than the rest of them. But their only similarity to a pole vaulter is they're built just like the pole the vaulter is carrying. So I've been coaching this group of people for 50 years with my background, and I'm trying to make sense of everything that goes about it. I stayed at UMass I competed at UMass for a long time. In the 4 years I competed in cross country, we had a really good team. And I stumbled upon the fact that just like in high school, the word team is more important than the word individual when it comes to any sport. If you have a team in the true sense of the word, all of us, all of you, everybody, will rise to a higher level than if it's just you looking for a record. You feel obligations, and you've heard those mentioned here tonight with the Hall of Fame inductees and their coaches. You want to rise to the highest level you can, and the only way you can do it is if you give all of yourself to every one of all of their selves that are on your team. And there comes an understanding. Coaches call meetings to explain it to the team. The team just kind of explains it to itself by the way it acts. But that's the biggest part of college athletics. That's the biggest part of athletics in general. And I think you hear coaches in National Football League players saying the same thing. 4 years after I got here, a guy named Douglas, Gundersheim rather, came up and he asked me, where are you going to graduate school? And I said, well, why would I want to go to graduate school? It gets familiar. He said, well, you could get your master's degree. And I said, well, I have a plan. I'm going to coach 2 sports in high school. You know, I don't need 4, 2's good. Make a little bit of money, and I'll be very happy with that. He said, well, if you go to get your master's degree, you'll make more money. And I said, I'll be very happy with that too. Where would you recommend? He said, Ohio University. I went to Ohio University. And I said, I thought it was Ohio State. Ohio University, great. I said, well, can I get some information from you? He said, yeah, I'll bring an application in. Call up a young guy out there named, I was going to say Bob James, but it doesn't matter. Excuse me. But they had their first sport management program at Ohio University. They put it in the year before. And it was a perfect fit for me. I got an assistantship. I was the assistant coach with a guy named Stan Huntsman, who went on to coach at the University of Texas, the University of Tennessee, and the United States Olympic team. So I spent a year with him, worked my butt off, watched, looked, and listened, stayed another year because it was so great, got a little bit more work done towards a postmaster's work, and came back to UMass really ready to go with what I had learned and how I had grown. Bumped into my coach again, 1966, Bill Futtrick, worked under him for a year and a half and took over in 1968. So that was my start. I came back with a fierce, as you hear from these tremendous inductees tonight, regardless of their sport, a fierce attachment to their sport, to their team, and to what has to be done to be successful. Patty certainly didn't blink in what she wanted to do when she wanted to be a great player. She played with the guys. She took her skirt and put it inside her sweatsuit. She was ready to go. There was no reservation in the fact that she might have been a woman and the majority of the people were men. So I came back with that same reservation, and I remembered that nice letter I got from Coach Futtrick, who had the best handwriting in the history of the world, and I started handwriting letters to high school kids in the state of Massachusetts, because I saw the Ohio University cross-country team finish 5th in the NCAA championships. And I knew, other than Elmore Banton, which was the young man they had who won that championship in 6 inches of snow, I might add, I knew our team here at UMass the last 2 years was better than their team was. We didn't have Elmore Banton, but I know the guys that we ran with, number one, were better. They were tougher. They wanted it a little bit more. And I had to get started putting something together along that line. So I started writing handwritten letters to people, students. Handwritten letters are now out of style for most people. They're especially out of style for college recruiters who have to get a lot of handwritten letters out to get a few people to come to school. I still write handwritten letters to recruits. The moms and dads like them. The kids kind of scratch their head, but they kind of figure that, it's cool. There's not, within 1 or 2 numbers, 4 or 5 people a year come up to me, young guys maybe, who are coaches, and say, Coach O'Brien, do you remember me? And I say, name's familiar. He says, years ago, you wrote me a handwritten letter, and everybody else typed it, or they sent it by computer. And I've still got that letter. And I said, that's cool. Now what's happening is, Coach O'Brien, years ago you sent me a handwritten letter, and I've still got that letter. And I said, that's great. I've heard that a couple of times. My father wants to speak to you. Years before that, he got a handwritten letter by you. And I said, I don't need that. I don't need that right now. One of the young men who we went through is with some of the track runners who are over in that last chair over there, closer to the ice cream and chocolate cake, is on our team right now. Do you know who it is? Anybody? Do you know who the young man is who's got the handwritten letter, whose father had the handwritten letter? Andrew Burke. Andrew Burke. So, came to UMass full of vinegar. A lot of the people who were on the staff, the physical education staff, was still here. A lot of people in this room will remember names. I couldn't pick out my favorite person, but they were all great ones. Bob James was a tremendous coach. Dick Garber was one of the best, if not the best you ever see. Bill Futtrick was involved. Sid Kaufman was one of the academicians. Dave Bischoff was one of the administrators. Julius Gundersheim, Bob James. They were still teaching in the area of physical education, and they provided all of the young coaches like myself just a tremendous sounding board. So I owe a lot from the School of Physical Education that has since stopped as a major on campus, and which I think is is a shame. But those guys were my mentors, and I grew quickly, and I think quicker than most people would, because I paid attention to what they said, what they did, and they were great leaders of young men, and they were great leaders in their area of their sport. So when I came back in 1966, I decided all of my handwritten letters had to go out pretty quick, and I recruited a young man named Ronnie Wayne, who was from Brockton High School, who won the state championship. We're in cross-country meet in the fall, won the state championship in the mile in the spring, and I think to this, and then when he came to college for us, he won the New England championship in the mile, and then he won the New England championship in cross country. And I think it might be I think I said he won the state championships. He won the New Englands in the mile in high school. He won the New Englands in the mile in college. He won the New Englands in high school and cross country, and won the New Englands in the mile in cross country at UMass. I think he's the only person to have recorded those 2 wins. But Ron was the kind of a guy who loved distance running. He became a marathoner after running so well for us. At some particular point, I can't remember the year, he was 4th in the Boston Marathon, and I believe he held the record of the most number of sub 2 hour and 20-minute marathons, and may still be in the top 5. But what does it take to do that? What does it take to do that kind of running and commit yourself to that kind of an experience? Well, track kids are kind of blind. They know where they want to go. They know who they want to make that journey with. They're willing to sacrifice as much as they possibly can. They've got a desire that transcends a lot of the sports that we would call spectator sports. There are not a lot of people watching track practices to get an article on the person who's going to run in the meet the next week. We do hear the band at UMass. It's way over there, and we're up in Shutesbury someplace running through the woods, but we do hear the band. But it's not playing for us. Athletes in this sport do not need the extrinsic acclamations or satisfactions that most athletes do. They thrive on the intrinsic stuff, what they put together themselves. How hard can they go one day or another? What do you need as a coach to motivate that? And once you find those combinations, then success comes your way. Our teams have been successful. We've been successful to the point where some of the statistics were introduced on the screen, and we ended up winning two IC4A championships, which catapulted us into a couple of NCAA appearances. We went on a couple of other times after we finished 2nd and 3rd, and we had a stretch of 4 out of 6 years where we went to the NCAAs, and I remember this in terms of satisfying things as far as I was concerned. I remember going to the NCAA cross-country championships in Spokane, and we ran very, very well. And I think we finished somewhere in the area of 10th or 12th. And I was driving back on the bus with a coach from Texas, El Paso. His name was Ted Banks, and he was one of the leading coaches in the country at the time, and Ted Banks' teams were winning a lot. And he turned to me and he said, "Coach, I've noticed your team the last couple of years. You guys are really coming around." I said, "Well, thank you very much." And he said, "How many international runners do you have on your team?" I said, "Well, we only have 2. He said, "Oh, where are they from?" I said, "Farmington, Connecticut, and Keene, New Hampshire." So we tried to build as much as we could with the resources we had, and it takes people to really step up, step out, and join hands together and make sure that everybody on that team exceeds what the expectations for you or for them are. And our sport does that amazingly well. In coaching, you have to have a plan. You have to go over things. You have to educate yourself. You have to take that education and then learn about the aspects of the people in your game, your players, your people from other events. You've got to listen, you've got to learn, you've got to honor the athletes and honor the trust that they have in you. If they place trust in you to steer them in a certain direction, you can't change course when they're not doing well. There's lots of reasons why athletes in any sport, which is true in any way of life, change directions in their ability to succeed. You have to step back, offer your ears, offer your eyes, offer your understanding, and don't be afraid to come away with something that might be a longer path to their success, but it might be the only path that is left. If you don't take advantage of listening to it, it could end up meaning the relationship with them in the sport and for you. A lot of the things I'm talking about are qualities that you develop in our sport with the proper approach that will serve you well with your family, will serve you well with your schools, will serve you well with your job, will serve you well with the community. You will become successful in a way that's extremely important, and that success is self-made. A coach is a helper. An athlete is a doer. It's a great combination, but it's got to be shared. And it's the same thing with, as I said, your family. If you get involved in a situation with your children or your parents, it's better to step back and watch, look, and listen. People who have gone on to climb the job ladder for us, started off in working, have become very, very, I would say, conscientious about how much they want to do. They volunteer. They reach forward. They try to make the next step in the ladder. They start saving money. They donate money to the university, and it becomes a multiple causal effect of combined efforts that will serve you not only in athletics, but it will serve you in the future. I've learned more from the people who I have worked with in terms of athletes, I'm sure, than they have learned from me. I give them a little, they give me a lot. I can give each one person something or two. I can receive something from 50 people in a day. And I consider myself to be extremely lucky because of situations that have developed in the past where I've actually become much better coach as I've gotten into my later years. At the same time, I think the young people who have come to UMass will acknowledge that their teammates, their team chemistry and camaraderie is as much a reason for the success as the coaching staff or the coach that they worked with. I think it's one of those situations where, as time goes on, maybe not the day after graduation, maybe not the year after graduation, but after that, when they move into later, a longer space between their competitive times and then they end up realizing what it means to have that kind of a relationship with a coach, with a person who is your coach. I know that the gentleman who asked me that question, how do I acknowledge that it's enjoyable to work for 50 years in the same place? And I say this, and I will read it because it took me a while to put it together. There's so many random thoughts in terms of what I feel is important. But for the most part, it goes like this. I'm deeply honored to be inducted into the Hall of Fame at the University of Massachusetts. But the biggest honor is being able to work with the University of Massachusetts students every day. Teaching and coaching, like good leadership, is having the ability and desire to cause positive changes in the lives of student athletes while helping to compete successfully in school and later on in life. Doing this has given me a quality of life greater than I ever imagined when I first came here as a student in 1959. So I want to thank all the students I have coached, all the teachers who have worked with me, all the alums who have come back to say hello, all the people who have conducted this particular event as a gathering place for that I want to thank them, and thank you very much.